Havenport never truly slept. Even in the pre-dawn hours of December 30th, the torches of the oil refinery rose above the city, and the hum of industrial plants reminded everyone that this Texas city of 120,000 had been living off oil for more than half a century. The smokestacks of Chevron and ExxonMobil towered over the residential neighborhoods like the metal cathedrals of modern America. Chuck Anderson woke up at 5 in the morning, as usual. 35 years, 12 of which he had worked as an operator on an oil rig, had taught his body to wake up automatically before the alarm clock rang. Next to him in bed lay Cora, wrapped in a blanket, her chestnut hair scattered across the pillow. Even after 7 years of marriage, Chuck still marveled at how lucky he was. Cora was a beautiful woman, tall, slender, with regular features that made men turn their heads on the street. But beauty wasn't the main thing. What mattered most was her devotion to her family, her home, and the lifestyle that Chuck believed to be right. Their house in the Oakwood neighborhood was a typical single-story ranch with brick walls and a neat lawn. Nothing special by big city standards, but for Havenport, it was quite respectable housing. Chuck bought it for cash 5 years ago, when oil prices were high, and overtime at the rig allowed him to save a decent amount of money. After making coffee in the kitchen, Chuck looked out the window at his neighbor's house. Jake Morris was already tinkering with his Ford F-150 pickup truck in the garage. Jake was 3 years older than Chuck, but they had been friends since school. After the Army, Jake returned to Havenport and started a small construction company that specialized in repairing industrial facilities. Business was good. The Texas oil industry was constantly in need of equipment maintenance and upgrades. "Morning, neighbor!" Jake shouted when he saw Chuck at the window. Chuck waved and came out onto the porch with a mug of coffee. It was a cool December morning by Texas standards, around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. There was a slight chemical smell in the air from the factories, something the locals had long since grown accustomed to. "Getting ready for today's shift?" Jake asked, wiping his hands with a rag. "The last one this year," Chuck replied. "How about you? Are you ready for tomorrow's party?" Jake grinned. "Sarah's been running around like crazy for the last 3 days, buying groceries, cleaning the house, planning the menu. You'd think we were hosting the president, not a dozen old friends." Sarah Morris was the complete opposite of her husband. Where Jake was relaxed and practical, Sarah was meticulous and attentive to detail. Her job as a teacher at Havenport Elementary School had taught her to be organized and plan ahead. She was the kind of woman who made shopping lists a week in advance and knew the exact arrival time of every bus in town. "Is Cora helping with the preparations too?" Jake asked. "She promised to bring her famous pecan pie," Chuck replied proudly, "and shrimp salad." Cora was indeed an excellent cook. It was one of the many things Chuck appreciated about her. She knew how to make a home cozy, was sociable but not intrusive, beautiful but not provocative. She was the ideal wife for a man of his background and views. When Chuck returned home, Cora was already in the kitchen, making herself some tea. She was wearing a pink robe that accentuated her figure, and her hair was pulled back in a casual bun. "Good morning, dear," she said, standing on tiptoe to kiss him on the cheek. "Good morning, beautiful. Did you sleep well?" "Wonderfully. How about you? Not too nervous about the last shift of the year?" Chuck shrugged. Working on an oil rig required constant attention and strict adherence to safety rules, but after 12 years, it had become routine for him. The danger was always there, but Chuck had learned to live with it. "Everything will be fine. The main thing is that we can celebrate in peace tomorrow." Cora smiled, but Chuck noticed something elusive in her eyes. A slight anxiety? Or fatigue? Over the past few weeks, he had caught her looking distant several times, as if she were thinking about something far away. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Of course. I'm just a little nervous about the party. I want everything to go perfectly." Chuck put his arm around his wife's waist. "Don't worry so much. They're just friends. We've known them all for years." That's exactly why I'm nervous, Cora replied. When you've known people for a long time, they expect a lot from you. There was a strange sadness in her words that Chuck couldn't understand, but there was no time to figure it out. He had to be at work in an hour. After breakfast, Chuck drove to the factory. The workday promised to be quiet. The pre-New Year's shift usually proceeded at a measured pace, without any emergencies. His colleagues were in a good mood, discussing their plans for the holidays and sharing news. "I heard the Morrises are throwing their New Year's party again?" asked Ray Thompson, an operator from the neighboring plant. "Yes, tomorrow evening," Chuck replied. "Sarah has been preparing for a week. You're lucky with your neighbors. I have an old man living next door who complains about every extra decibel after 10 o'clock at night." Chuck really did consider himself lucky. Good neighbors, a stable job, a beautiful wife, his own house. By Havenport standards, he was a successful man. Maybe not rich, but well off and respectable. Meanwhile, Cora spent the day at home preparing for the party. She baked a pecan pie, made a shrimp salad, and even baked star-shaped cookies, especially for the children who might come with their parents. But she spent most of her time standing at the window looking out at the street. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Sarah Morris came by. They planned to go to the grocery store together for the last few purchases for the party. "Hi, Cora. Ready to go shopping?" Sarah asked cheerfully as she entered the house. Sarah was an energetic woman of medium height with short blonde hair and lively green eyes. She wore practical clothes, jeans, a sweater, and comfortable boots. In her hands, she held a shopping list written in neat teacher's handwriting. "Sure, I'll just grab my purse," Cora replied. In the car, Sarah talked non-stop about her plans for the party. "I bought new garlands and balloons. Jake thinks it's too much, but I want to create a festive atmosphere. And I ordered champagne, real French champagne, not that cheap stuff from the supermarket." Cora listened half-heartedly, nodding in the right places. She loved Sarah, but sometimes her enthusiasm was exhausting, especially now when Cora felt on the verge of a nervous breakdown. They spent over an hour at Walmart buying food for the party. Sarah carefully checked the list, and Cora obediently pushed the cart. In the checkout line, they ran into Laura Davis, the wife of a local banker, who was also going to the party. "How's it going, girls?" Laura greeted them. "See you tomorrow at the Morrises?" "Sure," Sarah replied. "It'll be fun." "How are you, Cora? You've been looking pale lately," Laura remarked. "I'm fine, just a little tired," Cora replied, trying to smile. Laura was one of those women who noticed everything and had an opinion about everything. In a small community like Havenport, despite its size, such people could be dangerous. In the evening, when Chuck came home from work, the house smelled of holiday baking and cleanliness. Cora had prepared his favorite dish, roast chicken with mashed potatoes. Over dinner, they discussed plans for the following evening. "Sarah says there will be about 15 people," Cora said. "Jake invited some of his building contractors, and Sarah invited her colleagues from school." "Great. I haven't seen Bill Henderson in a while. He promised to tell me about his new project." Chuck was in a good mood. The weekend was ahead, New Year's, time to relax with friends. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with Cora. She was too quiet, too pensive. "Honey, are you sure you're okay?" he asked as they cleared the table. Cora froze for a moment, holding a plate in her hands. "Yes, of course. It's just that sometimes I think about the past, about how we met, how my life has changed. And what do you think?" "That I'm very lucky to have you," she replied, but there was a strange sadness in her voice. That night, Cora couldn't fall asleep for a long time. She lay next to her peacefully sleeping husband and thought about tomorrow evening, about the people who would come to the party, about the fact that one of them might recognize her, about the fact that her past, which she had so carefully hidden for 7 years, could suddenly resurface and destroy everything she had built. Chuck was a good man, honest, hardworking, devoted. He deserved better than a wife who had been cheating on him since the day they met. But how could she tell him the truth now? How could she explain that the woman he thought was perfect was actually someone else entirely? Outside the window, the factory hummed, creating the familiar industrial lullaby of Havenport. Somewhere in the city, other families were preparing for the new year, making plans, hoping for the best. And Cora Anderson lay in the dark, afraid of tomorrow. December 31st began like any other day off. Chuck woke up around 8 in the morning and found that Cora was already up and making breakfast. The smell of bacon and freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen, creating an atmosphere of homey comfort. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty," Cora joked when Chuck appeared in the kitchen wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. "Very funny," he replied, hugging his wife from behind. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep. Too much to do before the party." Chuck noticed that Cora had dark circles under her eyes, and her hands were shaking slightly as she flipped the bacon in the pan. Yesterday's anxiety had not gone away. After breakfast, Cora went to the bedroom to pick out an outfit for the party, and Chuck decided to spend some time in the garage organizing his tools. It was his way of relaxing, methodically cleaning and arranging wrenches, screwdrivers, and other accessories. He turned on his old radio and tuned in to a local station that played classic rock. In the corner of the garage was his laptop, an old Dell that he sometimes used to watch instructional videos on working with oil equipment. Today, Chuck decided to check his email and maybe watch something on YouTube. He turned on the computer and waited for it to boot up, sipping coffee and listening to Lynyrd Skynyrd. When the system finally started up, Chuck opened his browser and went to YouTube. Among the recommended videos, his attention was drawn to a clip titled "Texas Beauties of the 90s, the Best Strip Clubs in the State." Chuck was no saint. Like most men his age, he sometimes watched such content, especially when his wife was not at home. The video turned out to be a documentary about the strip club industry in Texas in the 1990s. The narrator spoke with a serious expression about the social aspects and economic impact of this business. Chuck watched half-heartedly, more out of curiosity than real interest. About 10 minutes in, the interior of the Golden Horseshoe Club in Houston appeared on screen. The camera slowly panned across the room, showing tables, the stage, and colorful spotlights. Suddenly, Chuck froze. A girl in a red bikini was dancing on stage. She was tall, slender, with long brown hair. She moved with professional grace, skillfully working the pole. The camera zoomed in on her face for a few seconds, and Chuck felt the world around him collapse. It was Cora, his wife, the mother they planned to become in the coming years, the woman he considered the embodiment of purity and domestic comfort. Chuck rewound the video several times, making sure he wasn't imagining things. No, there was no doubt. It was definitely Cora, only younger. She was 20 or 22 at the time. The date flashed in the corner of the screen, 1998. Chuck's hands trembled. He closed the laptop and sat down on an old chair in the corner of the garage, trying to make sense of what he had seen. Cora never talked about her past in detail. She said she worked in restaurants and studied business administration in college, but then dropped out. When they met 7 years ago at a barbecue at mutual friend's house, she was a waitress at a local diner, a stripper. His wife was a stripper. Chuck tried to calm himself down. It was a long time ago before they met. People change. Everyone has a past. But why did she lie? Why did she hide the truth all these years? The worst part was that he felt like a fool. How many times had his colleagues teased him, saying he was too lucky to have such a beautiful wife? How many times had he proudly introduced Cora to his friends and neighbors? And now it turned out that half of Houston could see her naked for $20. The sound of the garage door opening made him jump. Cora appeared in the doorway, wearing jeans and a pink blouse. "Chuck, honey, dinner's ready," she said with a smile. "What are you doing in there?" Chuck looked at his wife and suddenly saw her in a completely different light. The same smile, the same movements, the same beauty. But now he knew where her grace and confidence in her own body came from. Nothing special, he replied, trying to make his voice sound normal. I was organizing my tools. Cora came closer and noticed how pale he looked. You look strange. Are you okay? Everything's fine, Chuck replied sharply, getting up from his chair. Lunch passed in an uncomfortable silence. Chuck poked at the chicken breast and rice Cora had prepared with his fork, unable to swallow a single bite. Cora tried to keep the conversation going by talking about plans for the party, but gradually fell silent, sensing the tension. Chuck, what's going on? She finally asked. You've been acting strange since this morning. Nothing's going on, he replied, without looking up from his plate. Don't lie to me. I can see you're upset. Did something happen at work? Chuck looked up sharply and looked his wife in the eyes. Are you lying to me? Cora blinked as if she had been slapped. What are you talking about? Your past, who you were before we met. Cora's face instantly paled. She put down her fork and folded her hands in her lap. I don't understand what you're getting at. The Golden Horseshoe, Houston, 1998. Does that ring a bell? Cora closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them, they were filled with tears. Where did you see that? It doesn't matter where. What matters is that you lied to me for 7 years. 7 years, Cora. Chuck stood up from the table so abruptly that the chair fell over. Cora flinched. I didn't lie to you. I just didn't tell you some things. Didn't tell me? Chuck could barely keep himself from shouting. You said you worked as a waitress and studied business, but in reality, you were stripping for money in front of a crowd of men. It's not as simple as you think, Cora said quietly. I was only 20 years old. I came to Houston with no money and no connections. My mother died of cancer, leaving behind huge medical bills. I had to pay them off and study at the same time. And you chose the easiest way? Easy? Cora raised her voice for the first time. Do you think it was easy? Enduring lewd looks and indecent proposals every night, feeling like a piece of meat? Then why did you do it? Because I earned as much in one night as a waitress earns in a week. Because I had no choice. Chuck paced around the kitchen, trying to control his emotions. Anger mixed with pain and disappointment. How long did you do that? Cora paused, wiping away her tears. About 2 years. Then I saved up enough money, paid off my debts, and left. I moved here to Havenport and started a new life. And you decided I would never find out? I hoped the past would stay in the past. Chuck, I'm not the woman I was back then. I've changed. You changed me. Changed? Chuck laughed bitterly. You're just a good actress. All these years you've been playing the role of the perfect wife, and I was stupid enough to believe it. It's not an act, Cora shouted, jumping up from her chair. I love you. Everything between us was real. True? The truth is that my wife was a stripper, and I found out about it by accident from a video on the internet. Cora approached him, reaching out her hands. Chuck, please listen to me. Yes, I hid my past, but only because I was afraid of losing you. I was afraid you would judge me for the mistakes of my youth. And I had no right to know who I was marrying? You did, Cora admitted quietly. And I tried to tell you many times, but how can I explain something I don't understand myself? How can I describe the despair that drives a 20-year-old girl to sell her body? Chuck moved away from his wife. Don't pressure me with pity. Millions of people face difficulties, but not all of them become strippers. You're right, Cora agreed. Not all of them. Only the most desperate. Only those who have no other choice. You always have a choice. That's easy to say when you're a middle-class man with a profession and a stable job. Those words stung Chuck. There was a grain of truth in them that he didn't want to admit. So it's all my fault? Because I was born a man? No, of course not. I'm not blaming you. I'm just asking for understanding. Chuck turned away toward the window. Through the glass, he could see the Morris's house, where a New Year's Eve party was to be held in a few hours. How could he go there? How could he look his friends in the eye, knowing that his marriage was based on a lie? "Who else knows?" he asked without turning around. "No one. I haven't told anyone." "What if someone finds out? What if our friends or neighbors see this video?" Cora didn't answer. Chuck turned to her. "Do you realize you've set me up? Now I look like a fool who lived with a former stripper for 7 years and didn't know anything." "I'm sorry," Cora whispered. "I'm really sorry." "Sorry?" Chuck felt the anger rising in his chest again. "Are you sorry you got caught, or are you sorry you lied?" "I'm sorry I hurt you." Chuck stared at his wife for a long time. This beautiful woman he loved and trusted had suddenly become a stranger to him. How many more secrets was she hiding? Could he believe a single word she said? "I need time to think," he said finally. "Chuck, please, let's talk. Don't leave now." "What is there to talk about? You made your choice 7 years ago when you decided to lie to me. Now I have to decide what to do about it." Chuck headed for the kitchen door, but Cora grabbed his arm. "What about the party?" "The Morrises are waiting for us." Chuck pulled his hand away. "Have fun without me. I'm not in the mood to celebrate." He went to his bedroom and locked himself in, leaving Cora alone in the kitchen with her tears and broken hopes. By 7 o'clock in the evening, the Morrises' house was aglow with festive lights. Sarah had spent the whole day decorating. Gold and silver garlands entwined the porch railing, candles flickered in the windows, and a wreath of fir branches with a large red bow hung on the front door. Inside, festive music played, and snacks and drinks were set out on the tables. Chuck stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom, buttoning his shirt. He hadn't spoken to Cora since their argument that afternoon. He had spent several hours in the garage, aimlessly sorting through tools and trying to decide what to do next. Going to the party was the last thing he wanted to do, but refusing would require explanations he wasn't ready to give. Cora entered the bedroom wearing a black cocktail dress that accentuated her figure. Her makeup skillfully hid the traces of tears, and her hair looked flawless. But Chuck now saw something else in this beauty, the professional skill of a woman who knew how to look attractive. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. "Ready," Chuck replied curtly, without looking at his wife. "Chuck, please, let's not ruin the evening for our friends. Whatever is between us, Sarah and Jake are not to blame." Chuck turned to her. "Don't worry. I know how to behave in society, unlike some people." Cora flinched at the jab but said nothing. They left the house in silence. The cold December air was filled with the smell of smoke from fireplaces and the aroma of holiday food. The sounds of music and laughter came from the Morrises' house, where the first guests had already gathered. Sarah greeted them at the door with a broad smile. "Chuck, Cora, finally, come on in. Everyone's here." The living room was full of people. Chuck recognized most of the faces. They were old friends, neighbors, and colleagues of Jake and Sarah. Bill Henderson and his wife were standing by the fireplace. Teachers from Sarah's school were chatting by the snack table, and several couples from their neighborhood were sitting on the sofa. Jake approached them with 2 glasses of champagne. "Happy New Year, friends! How are you?" "Great," Chuck replied, taking a glass and immediately taking a big sip. Cora took her glass but hardly drank. She felt the eyes of the other guests on her and tried to smile, even though she felt anxious inside. "Cora, dear, you're glowing today," exclaimed Laura Davis, approaching them in a bright red dress. "That dress suits you very well." "Thank you," Cora replied, trying to sound natural. "You seem a little gloomy today, Chuck," Laura remarked. "Is work getting you down?" "Something like that," Chuck muttered and emptied his glass again. Jake looked at his friend in surprise. Chuck was usually the life of the party, telling jokes and keeping the conversation going. Today, he looked as if he had been forced to come against his will. Time dragged agonizingly slowly. Chuck stood at the bar Jake had set up in the corner of the living room and methodically drank whiskey. The alcohol did not bring relief, but only intensified his feelings of bitterness and resentment. He watched Cora interact with the other guests, how gracefully she moved, how skillfully she kept up the conversation. Now he understood where she got those skills. "Hey, buddy, maybe you should slow down a little." Jake approached Chuck around 10 o'clock in the evening. "You've already had 4 whiskeys." "Don't count for me," Chuck replied sharply. "Are you okay? You're acting strange." Chuck looked at his friend. Jake was a good man, honest and straightforward. I wonder how he would react if he knew the truth about Cor. "What if you found out that Sarah had been lying to you throughout your marriage?" Chuck asked. Jake frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Just hypothetically. What if it turned out that your wife wasn't who she claimed to be?" "Chuck, you've had too much to drink. Let's talk about this tomorrow." "No, I want to know now," Chuck insisted, raising his voice. "What would you do?" Several guests turned in their direction. Cora, standing next to a group of teachers, felt her heart skip a beat. "Chuck, please, not here," she said quietly, approaching her husband. "Where then?" Chuck turned to her, his eyes burning from alcohol. "You don't want to talk at home, so we'll talk here." "What's going on?" Sarah approached them with a concerned look. "Nothing special," Cora replied, trying to take Chuck's arm. "Chuck's just a little tired." "Tired?" Chuck laughed loudly. "Yes, I'm tired. Tired of lies." Now all the guests were looking at them. The music was playing, but the conversations had died down. The festive atmosphere began to evaporate. "Chuck, please, let's go home," Cora whispered. "Why? It's so much fun here." Chuck made a sweeping gesture with his hand. "Let's all get to know my wife better. Cora, tell our friends about your previous job." Cora paled. "Chuck, stop." "Why? Are you ashamed? Weren't you ashamed then?" Jake tried to intervene. "Friend, you're crossing the line. Maybe it's better." "Stay out of it," Chuck snapped at him. "This is between me and my dear wife." Laura Davis couldn't hide her curiosity. She moved closer, not wanting to miss the family drama. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "What kind of job was it?" Cora closed her eyes, feeling the world she had so carefully built over 7 years crumble. "My wife," Chuck said with a bitter smile, "was a stripper in Houston. She took her clothes off for money. That's our family secret." There was a dead silence. Some of the guests gasped. Bill Henderson choked on his drink. The teachers exchanged shocked and disapproving glances. "Chuck!" Sarah exclaimed. "How could you?" "How what?" Chuck spread his arms. "I'm just telling the truth." For the first time in 7 years, Cora opened her eyes. They were filled with tears, but she held herself with dignity. "Yes, it's true. I worked in a strip club when I was 20. It was a long time ago, and I regret it." "Regret what?" Laura asked with poorly concealed malice. "That you worked as a stripper, or that you lied to your husband?" "That I'm hurting the person I love," Cora replied, looking straight at Chuck. "Love?" Chuck laughed bitterly. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have lied from day one. I lied because I was afraid of losing you. And you were right to be afraid. Do you think I would have married a former stripper?" Those words felt like a slap in the face. Cora felt something inside her break completely. "So I was right to hide the truth," she said quietly. "You really do judge me." "What's there to judge?" one of the teachers interjected. "Normal women don't sell their bodies." "Shut up, Debbie," Sarah snapped. "It's none of your business." But it was too late. The scandal was in full swing. The guests divided into 2 camps. Some condemned Cora, others tried to defend her. "I don't understand what difference it makes what she did before she got married," said Bill Henderson. "What matters is what kind of wife she has been all these years." "A lying wife," Chuck replied. "I lived with deception for 7 years." "And you're the epitome of honesty?" Cora suddenly snapped. "Do you think I don't know about your trips to bars with your colleagues? About how you look at other women? That's completely different." "Oh, how is it different?" "Because I earned money with my beauty, and you just take advantage of someone else's for free? Chuck took a step toward his wife, and for a moment it seemed he might hit her. Jake quickly stepped between them. Enough! You're both crossing the line. You know what, Jake? Chuck pushed his friend away. Maybe you don't know everything about your wife either. Maybe Sarah has her little secrets too? Sarah was indignant. How dare you? Chuck, you've gone too far, Jake warned, clenching his fists. The atmosphere was tense. The guests watched the unfolding drama with a mixture of horror and curiosity. Some had already begun to gather their things to go home, not wanting to witness the family nightmare. Cora suddenly straightened up and looked at everyone present. All right, since everything is out in the open, let's be honest. Yes, I was a stripper. For 2 years, I made a living dancing in a club. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed of it either. I did what I had to do to survive. She turned to Chuck. And you, my dear husband, never cared about my past. A beautiful, obedient wife who cooks, cleans, and doesn't ask unnecessary questions was enough for you. You fell in love with an image, not a person. That's not true, Chuck began, but Cora interrupted him. It is true. And now that the image is ruined, you're ready to destroy everything. But you know what? I'm tired of pretending. Tired of being your perfect little doll. She took off her wedding ring and placed it on the table next to her half-finished glass of champagne. The party's over, at least for me. Cora headed for the exit, but turned around at the door. I'm sorry I ruined your party. Sarah, thank you for your hospitality. Jake, take care of your family. The door closed behind her with a soft click. A heavy silence hung in the living room, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece. It was less than an hour before midnight, but the festive mood was irretrievably ruined. Chuck stood in the middle of the room, staring at his wife's ring. The alcohol began to wear off, and he suddenly realized the magnitude of what had happened. Their marriage had collapsed in public, in front of all their friends and neighbors. Well, Happy New Year, one of the guests said gloomily. The new year promised to bring something completely different from what the Andersons had dreamed of just a few hours ago. The clock on the mantelpiece struck midnight, but none of the remaining guests felt festive. After Cora left, the party quickly fell apart. Most people went home on the pretext of being tired, but in reality, no one wanted to witness the family drama. Chuck sat on the sofa in the Morrises' living room, staring at an empty whiskey glass. Next to him on the coffee table lay Cora's wedding ring, a small gold circle that now seemed like a guilty verdict on their marriage. Why don't you go home and talk to her? Sarah suggested as she cleared away the dirty dishes. She must be upset. Let her be upset, Chuck muttered. She's been lying for 7 years. Jake shook his head. Buddy, you went too far today. Making a scene like that in front of people? What was I supposed to do? Keep quiet and continue playing the happy family? You could have talked about it at home like adults. Chuck raised his head and looked at his friend with inflamed eyes. It's easy to say when you don't have any problems. What if you found out that Sarah... He didn't finish the sentence, but the hint was clear. Sarah gave him an angry look. Don't you dare drag us into your problems, Chuck Anderson. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, Chuck finally decided to go home. Jake offered to walk him there, but Chuck refused. The cold air sobered him up a little, but the feeling of bitterness and resentment remained. The Andersons' house was dark. Chuck entered the hallway and shouted, Cora, I'm home! There was no answer. Chuck went into the living room, then into the kitchen. Everything was empty. There was no one in the bedroom either, although Cora's evening gown was lying on the bed as if she had changed and gone somewhere. Cora! Chuck called again, but silence was the only answer. He looked out the window at the Morrises' house. The lights were still on downstairs. Maybe Cora had gone back to the neighbors to apologize for ruining the evening. Meanwhile, Jake and Sarah were finishing cleaning up after the party. Sarah was just as upset as Cora. She had spent weeks preparing for the party, and it had all ended in a scandal. We should have stopped Chuck earlier, she said. putting the plates in the dishwasher. Poor Cora. I tried, Jake replied, but he was like a madman. What will happen now? They're neighbors. We see each other all the time. Jake shrugged. They'll work it out somehow, or get divorced. Around 2 a.m, Jake took the trash bags out to the garage. He opened the automatic gate and headed for the trash cans in the far corner. The light from the bulb on the ceiling illuminated the garage with a dim yellow glow. Jake didn't immediately notice the figure against the far wall. At first, he thought it was a pile of old rags or forgotten clothes, but when he got closer, he froze in horror. Cora was lying on the concrete floor. She was wearing jeans and a dark jacket. Her hair was tousled. Her eyes were closed. Her face was pale as chalk. A dark puddle was spreading near her head. "My God," Jake whispered, dropping the trash bags. He ran to Cora and knelt down. There was no pulse in her neck. Her skin was cold. There was a bloody wound on the back of her head, and a heavy wrench stained with blood lay nearby. Jake jumped up and ran into the house. "Sarah! Sarah! Call the police! Quick!" "What happened?" his wife asked fearfully, running out at her husband's cry. "Cora, she's dead, in our garage." Sarah turned pale and grabbed the wall. "What? That's impossible! Call 911, immediately!" The police arrived 15 minutes later. The first to arrive were 2 patrol officers, Martinez and Johnson. They were followed by an ambulance, although it was too late to help Cora. Detective Thomas Riley received the call around 3 a.m. A 45-year-old veteran of the Havenport Police Department, he had been investigating murders for 20 years. Most of the cases in their city were related to drugs or domestic violence, but from time to time, there were more complex cases. Upon arriving at the scene, Riley's first order of business was to examine the body. Cora was lying face down, her arms spread out to the sides. The blow had been to the back of her head, a heavy one, possibly fatal on the first strike. "Who found the body?" he asked Officer Martinez. "Jake Morris, the owner of the house. He says he took out the trash around 2 a.m. and found her here." "Where is he now?" "At home with his wife. They're both in shock." Riley walked around the garage, studying the scene. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of forced entry. The murder weapon lay next to the body, a regular wrench from Jake's toolbox. "Did anyone see how she got here?" the detective asked. "Not clear yet. Neighbors say she left the party around midnight after an argument with her husband." Riley nodded. Domestic murder was the most likely scenario. The statistics were relentless. In 80% of cases, women were killed by their husbands or former partners. "Where is the husband now?" "At home, nearby. Officer Johnson is guarding him." Oh. The detective left the crime scene investigators to work and headed to the Andersons' house. Chuck was sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. He looked sober, but confused. "Mr. Anderson, I'm Detective Riley, Havenport Police. My condolences on your loss." Chuck looked up. His eyes were red, but not from crying, more from exhaustion and a hangover. "Is it true? Is Cora really dead?" "Unfortunately, yes. I need to ask you a few questions." Chuck nodded, as if in a daze. "When was the last time you saw your wife?" "At the Morris's party. She left around midnight after we had an argument." "Tell me about that argument." Chuck paused, then briefly recounted the events of the evening. About his discovery, about the confrontation at home, about the public scandal at the party. "Did you threaten your wife?" Riley asked bluntly. "No, I was angry. I said a lot of things I shouldn't have, but I never threatened her." "Witnesses say you were very aggressive." "I was drunk and upset, but I would never lay a hand on Cora." Riley made notes in his notebook. "What did you do after your wife left the party?" "I stayed at the Morrises for another hour, then came home. Cora was already gone." "What time exactly did you get home?" "Around 1 a.m, maybe a little later." "And what did you do next?" "I looked for Cora around the house, then went to bed. I thought she was spending the night at a friend's house or something." The detective studied Chuck closely. The man looked genuinely shocked, but that didn't mean anything. Riley had seen excellent actors among murderers. "Can you prove you were home all night?" "I was asleep. Alone. There's no proof." Next, Riley questioned the Morrises. Jake was still pale from shock, and Sarah was crying in the kitchen. "Tell me about the party," the detective asked. Jake described the events of the evening in detail, confirming Chuck's story about the public quarrel. "Was Chuck very aggressive?" "Yes, but it was the alcohol. He's usually a calm guy." "And Cora? How did she behave?" "She was upset, of course. Who wouldn't be in that situation? But she held herself with dignity." "Who else was at the party?" Jake named all the guests. About 15 people witnessed the Andersons' family drama. "Could any of them have had a motive to kill Cora?" Jake shook his head. "I can't imagine. They're all our old friends, neighbors." "What about you? What was your relationship with Cora like?" "Good. Friendly. We've been neighbors for many years." Riley turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Morris, did you know Cora well?" "Of course," Sarah replied through her tears. "We were friends. She was a good woman." "What do you think about her past? About her work as a stripper?" Sarah wiped her eyes. "That's none of my business. Everyone has a past." "What about your husband? How did he feel about Cora?" "Jake? Fine. He's nice to everyone." By dawn, the forensic team had finished examining the crime scene. The wrench had been sent for analysis, photographs had been taken, and blood samples and possible evidence had been collected. Riley stood in the Morrises' garage, trying to piece together what had happened. Cora left the party upset and angry. Instead of going home, she came here for some reason. Why? To apologize? To pick something up? Or to meet someone? The killer used a tool from Jake's garage. It could have been an impulsive act, not a premeditated murder. But who had access to the garage? And why did Cora go there? The detective realized that this case would be more complicated than it seemed at first glance. Too many people had a motive. Too many questions remained unanswered. By the time the sun rose over Havenport, news of the murder had already spread throughout the city. Cora Anderson, a former stripper, was killed in her neighbor's garage after a public scandal with her husband. It was a story that could have been the plot of a television detective show if it weren't so real and tragic. Detective Riley didn't sleep all night. By the morning of January 2nd, he had the statements of 15 witnesses, photos from the crime scene, and the preliminary report from the forensic team on his desk. The picture seemed simple and obvious. A jealous husband killed his wife after a public scandal. But 20 years of experience had taught Riley not to trust the obvious. The first warning sign was a call from the lab. Fingerprints had been found on the wrench, but not the ones the detective had expected. In addition to the victim's blood and Jake Morris's fingerprints, which was logical since the tool belonged to him, the forensic team found another clear fingerprint. It belonged to a woman. Riley returned to the witness statements, rereading them more carefully. Most of the guests confirmed Chuck's aggressive behavior, but no one saw him follow his wife after she left. Moreover, several people remembered that Chuck stayed at the party for about an hour, drinking and complaining about life. The detective compiled a timeline of events. Cora left the Morrises' house around midnight. Chuck went home at 1 a.m. Jake discovered the body at 2 a.m. That left a 2-hour window during which the murder could have taken place. But why did Cora go to the garage? This question bothered Riley. It would have been more logical for her to go straight home or to a friend's house. The garage was not a place to hide from the cold or think things over. Riley decided to revisit the crime scene in daylight. The Morrises' garage was perfectly organized. Tools were neatly hung on the walls, Jake's car was parked in the middle, and trash cans were against the far wall. That was where the body was found. The detective noticed a small detail that he had missed the night before. On the workbench lay a woman's earring, a small gold drop with a pearl. He had seen the same earring in Sarah Morris's ear the day before. Back at the station, Riley requested a detailed check of the Andersons and Morrises' financial transactions. The results came in by evening and brought another mystery. Sarah Morris's bank account showed regular large cash withdrawals over the past 3 months. Each time it was $500, always on the first Thursday of the month. The detective decided to check out this lead. The ATM where Sarah withdrew the money was located next to a small shopping center on the outskirts of Havenport. Riley reviewed the surveillance camera footage from the past few months. The footage clearly showed Sarah approaching the ATM, withdrawing money, and then heading to a small cafe in the same building. The cafe owner, an elderly Mexican man named Carlos, remembered Sarah well. She came every month, ordered coffee, and met with a woman. Carlos described the woman as a tall blonde in her 30s with a noticeable Texas accent. Riley asked Carlos to look at some photos, and he immediately pointed to a picture of Cora Anderson. The picture was starting to come together, but it was still incomplete. Why was Sarah secretly meeting with Cora and paying her money? What connected the two women who publicly portrayed a normal neighborly friendship? The answer came from an unexpected source. While looking through Cora's personal belongings, which Chuck had handed over to the police, the detective discovered an old notebook. Most of the entries were about household matters, but the last few pages contained names and amounts. Among them was SM, $500 every month until January. The next morning, Riley summoned Sarah Morris to the station for further questioning. The woman looked exhausted and nervous. The detective decided not to play cat and mouse. "Mrs. Morris, tell me about your meetings with Cora Anderson at the cafe on Main Street." Sarah's face instantly paled. "I don't understand what you're talking about." "We have surveillance footage and a witness. You met with Cora every month and gave her money. Why?" Sarah remained silent, clasping her hands together. Riley placed a photo of an earring in front of her. "We found this earring in your garage near where the body was lying. You wore the same earrings at the party." "I could have lost it at any time," Sarah said quietly. "You could have. But combined with your regular payments to Cora, it looks suspicious. Was she blackmailing you?" A long silence. Then Sarah suddenly broke down. "She wasn't blackmailing me. I paid her myself." "For what?" "For keeping quiet about what happened between me and Chuck." Riley felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. "Tell me more." Sarah took a deep breath. "It started 2 years ago. Jake was working a lot, constantly traveling to different sites. I felt lonely. Chuck was also often alone when Cora went to visit her sister in Dallas. We started spending time together. At first, just as friends, and then, did you have an intimate relationship? For several months, it was crazy. I knew I was destroying 2 families, but Chuck was so attentive, so gentle. He said that something was missing in his marriage to Cora. Did Cora know? She suspected something. 3 months ago, she came to my house when Jake was away. She said she saw us in my car near the old quarry. She had photos on her phone." Riley nodded, understanding the logic of how events had unfolded. "And she demanded money for her silence?" "No," Sarah replied sharply. "Cora wasn't like that. She said she didn't want to destroy our families, but she couldn't pretend she didn't know anything. She asked for time to think, and I offered her money myself. I said I'd pay her every month until she decided what to do." "And what did Cora decide?" "In December, she said it had to end. That starting in the new year, she wouldn't keep quiet anymore. Either I would tell Jake and Chuck myself, or she would." Now Riley understood why Sarah had looked so tense at the party. "Is that why you were so worried on New Year's Eve?" "I hadn't slept for weeks. I imagined how my marriage would fall apart, how Jake would find out about the betrayal. And then this scandal with Cora's past happened." "And you saw an opportunity?" Sarah covered her face with her hands. "When Cora left the party, I thought that maybe she and Chuck would get divorced, that the scandal would solve the problem for me. But then I realized that even if they did get divorced, Cora would still tell the truth, out of revenge. What happened in the garage? Sarah was silent for a long time, gathering her courage. I saw Cora through the kitchen window. She was walking towards our house. I went out to meet her, thinking she wanted to apologize for ruining the party. But she was furious. What did she say? That now that her reputation is ruined, she has nothing to lose. That tomorrow, she would tell Jake and Chuck about our relationship. She said that if her life was ruined, then ours had to be ruined too. Riley took notes, occasionally looking up at Sarah. What happened next? I asked her to come into the garage so the neighbors wouldn't hear our conversation. I begged her to wait, to give me time to explain everything to Jake myself. But she wouldn't listen. She said horrible things, called me a hypocrite and a coward. And then you hit her? I didn't plan it. I swear, I didn't mean to kill her. She was screaming so loudly. She was so angry. I grabbed the first thing I could find. It was a wrench from Jake's workbench. I just wanted to scare her, to make her shut up. But she turned around, and I, Sarah, burst into tears. Riley waited until she calmed down a little. What did you do after that? I realized she was dead. I was in shock. I went back into the house, washed my face, changed my clothes. I continued cleaning up after the party as if nothing had happened. I hoped they wouldn't find the body right away, that I would have time to think. But Jake went out to take out the trash. I forgot about the trash. When he said he was going to the garage, I knew it was over. The detective closed his notebook. The case was solved, but he felt no satisfaction. One woman was dead, another would spend the best years of her life in prison, and 2 families were destroyed forever. Sarah Morris's trial took place in the spring. Her lawyer tried to get the charge reduced to manslaughter, citing the state of passion and lack of premeditation. But the prosecutor insisted on second-degree murder, emphasizing that the defendant had concealed the crime and tried to shift the blame onto the victim's husband. The jury returned a guilty verdict on the second-degree murder charge. Sarah was sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Jake Morris filed for divorce the day after his wife's arrest. He sold the house and left Havenport. Some said he moved to Montana to live with his brother, but no one knew for sure. Chuck Anderson also left town, but much later. First he quit his job, then he started drinking. Neighbors saw him sitting in his yard all day, staring at the Morris's house. The guilt over his wife's death tormented him as much as the grief of losing her. If he hadn't caused a public scandal, if he hadn't humiliated Cora in front of everyone, she might still be alive. In the summer, Chuck sold the house and disappeared from Havenport. One of his former colleagues said he saw him in Houston, working as a warehouse loader, but maybe it was just someone who looked like him. Detective Riley stayed in town and continued his service. The Cora Anderson case became one of the most difficult in his career, not because it was difficult to solve, but because there were no real guilty or innocent parties. Only people who made mistakes, hid the truth, and paid an exorbitant price for it. Cora Anderson's story became a warning to anyone who thought that the past could simply be forgotten and that lies could be hidden harmlessly. In Havenport, they understood that sometimes the truth kills, but lies kill even more often.